In movies, the humble video game has often been the butt of the joke.
Like we have a new game called Xantar. Xantar is a gelatinous cube that eats warriors in a medieval village.
Gelatinous cube eats village. I think it's terrific.
But after years relegated to bargain bin direct-to-video slop or critically maligned box office flops, video game adaptations have suddenly turned into critical and financial successes. The bright and poppy Super Mario Bros. Movie dominated the box office, and HBO's dark and gory The Last of Us debuted to critical acclaim, while Prime's Fallout blew up audience expectations as a runaway hit for the platform. So what's behind the sudden reversal of fortunes for video game adaptations? How did they suddenly get good? As video games reached mass markets and serious profitability in the early 1990s, film producers took note. The first live-action video game adaptation took arguably one of the biggest properties in gaming, the venerable Mario franchise, and set it in an unrecognizable dystopian Los Angeles. The following year, an adaptation of fighting franchise Double Dragon took the opposite approach, sticking closely to the source material. It did even worse. The awful critical reception of these films set a tone for adaptations to come. Either stick to the source material and bore general audiences, or alter it radically and disappoint steadfast fans.
Why'd you do that? No!
In part, the issue was that video games themselves offered scant source material to adapt. Graphics and sound capabilities were poor, and development often focused more on gameplay rather than story or character. This is what audiences responded to in these games: the gameplay loop, a set of core mechanics that can be repeated and altered to provide challenge and satisfaction. Super Mario Bros., for instance, offered little characterization of its title characters other than that they were plumbers and liked to jump, itself a reflection more of gameplay than of the brothers. Mario's original name, in fact, was Jumpman. Mario's sprite, measuring just 32 pixels high, offered little further characterization, and players' understanding of the setting and characters in these games were often bolstered by light descriptions in manuals and the art on arcade cabinets. Where games did have plots, they were otherwise limited. Paul W.S. Anderson's adaptation of Mortal Kombat, for instance, is quite faithful to the original games. There are some casting problems, motivated by reasons ranging from practicality to insensitivity. These issues are largely present in the original game, but the core story, an international group of fighters coming together for an interdimensional tournament, just didn't work on screen. Anderson's film was critically panned, not just on its own merits. The story and characters of the video games simply weren't up to scratch for film-going audiences. At the same time, many films about gaming did well. Tron, The Last Starfighter, War Games, The Lawnmower Man. Even the late French art house director Agnès Varda was interested in the cultural impact of video games, placing the titular arcade cabinet at the centre of her 1988 film Kung Fu Master. So audiences certainly had an appetite for seeing gaming on the big screen. But in these more successful films, the stories are about the idea of play itself, and the draw of virtual worlds, rather than adapting stories from specific games. As technology developed, the ability of games to tell deeper stories rapidly grew. Self-consciously cinematic games like Metal Gear Solid pulled liberally from film influences, while sprawling role-playing games like Final Fantasy VII offered 100+ hour stories that would put a TV show to shame. And it's from this era of games that we begin to see some successful film adaptations. Christoph Gantz's brooding, textured Silent Hill adaptation in 2006 is possibly the best example. The game's story was praised on release for its thematic depth and rich psychological characterization. But unlike similarly praised RPGs that ran for many hours, its story was relatively short and well contained, making it ideal for adaptation. The violence and sexual imagery seen throughout both game and film versions of Silent Hill, however, points to an issue with these developing, mature, story-focused games. To attract the largely teen male audiences coveted by publishers, these games often lent on gore, misogyny, and nihilism.
You bitch!
A spate of bottom-rung adaptations by infamous straight-to-DVD merchant Uwe Boll drew significantly on these elements. The title character of Blood Rain, for instance, is now mostly well known for having the only digital centerfold in Playboy history. As technology improved, film adaptations also faced an increased need to hew closely to the visual styles deployed in the games themselves. While Gantz was well placed to use Silent Hill's iconic fog in his film, other adaptations were less lucky. The high point of 2005's Doom adaptation, for instance, is an extended sequence of first-person camera work mimicking the game's perspective. However, the technical limitations of translating this into film at the time mean that the movie's rendition feels much slower and clunkier than its video game counterpart. These emerging factors feed into the runaway success of modern game adaptations, and The Last of Us is a perfect example. The original game was critically lauded for the depth of storytelling and characterization, which elevates it above the well-trodden zombie apocalypse setting. HBO's TV adaptation was given creative freedom to explore and expand on these ideas, shifting timings, characters, and events to create an experience that builds on the original story for fans of the games, while surprising new audiences as well. Prime's Fallout show likewise draws on the world-building of the sprawling franchise it's based on, firmly placed within the canon of the games, but telling a wholly original story with its new central character. The visual style of Fallout's retro-futurist setting is also key to this adaptation, lending the show a library of imagery that will be iconic to fans and fresh to new viewers. If there's one element that's still missing, it's the presence of play.
I don't believe this.
While The Last of Us and Fallout both depict filmic versions of their central gameplay, this is only a loose adaptation, and the experience of that core gameplay loop is still absent. As this central element is inherently repetitive, it may never fit into linear filmmaking, but experiments like Sony's Until Dawn film, which incorporates a time loop to attempt to reflect the gameplay experience, may one day crack the code.
This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.